Morning, everybody. Sorry to join you a little late. We had what they call in the business some technical difficulties, but we're happy to be part of your morning here on the morning meeting. Sean, Dan, and I will run you through the day with the president overseas on day 2 of his exciting Middle East adventure. We'll tell you about that and what's going on Capitol Hill, a few other items. Then we'll kick it around. And for those of you who think this entire program should just be about the media, you're in luck. Today, we're going to talk about the media and this new book about Joe Biden and not about the press. And then, of course, we'd love your questions. If you're on the two-way platform like Matt Marks, raise your electronic hand. We'll get you into the conversation. If you're watching on X or YouTube, sorry, we started late. And don't put smack in the chat. Think about peace, love, and understanding. Have it top of mind throughout the hour. And we're glad to have you part of this. The president flew this morning from Saudi to Qatar, and he's in Qatar, and he's already participating in some meetings there. We'll show you the video of him arriving there. First, here he is. Here's the president's arrival. You can see that again. That crap Air Force One plane.
I was just gonna say, no garbage coming out of it yet.
Needs to be replaced. He's got meetings all day in Qatar, and then he's overnighting at the St. Regis, which is another Marriott property. So he's racking up the Bonvoy points on the entire journey. So there's the arrival. And now, Paul, you can show the photo op. This is him meeting with his Qatari counterpart. Got that other video.
Aren't many world leaders taller than him? Look at that.
No, they're not. Macron definitely not. All right. I'll just say about the pool that the Washington Post is in the pool today, which I find interesting. And the New York Times is in the pool today. I wonder if that's a coincidence or they thought since it's a big, important day, they should have those two places in the pool.
El Clasico. They got the oldies there.
Exactly. All right. Don't know what the vice president's doing. I know on Capitol Hill, the House and Senate are in overnight hearings to mark up reconciliation, some of which I believe are still going on.
Ways and Means is out now. Yep, they passed it through. Yep.
They're meeting right now. The caucus and the conference in the House having their weekly meetings, and afterwards, the Speaker and his leadership team at 10 will hold a press conference. 11:30, the Democratic House leadership. On the Senate side, there's a bunch of hearings going on, including some budget hearings, one with Lee Zeldin, one with RFKJ, and lots of conversations about reconciliation and just the roller coaster, particularly on SALT. Some people say they'll solve it. Other people say it's doomed. Reporting this morning about how the Senate and the Senate's going to modify the package so substantially that it may be a challenge to pass the House. No surprise there.
And by the way, can we just say quickly how insane the Democratic House caucus is, that what they're debating mostly this morning is an idiotic impeachment movement by a backbencher.
Yes.
The irony of that is what is consuming the beginning of our caucus meeting with all this other stuff going on, tells you the state of the party.
No surprise, unfortunately, but yes. Now, they also are talking about tax cuts for the wealthy, et cetera. All right, so the trip. Every White House hopes to get lots of coverage back home for the trip, see the president be presidential, announce the deliverables, hope to make them relevant to the real lives of real people. And it's not always as successful. It's rarely as successful as the trip planners and the president hope it is. That's true of presidents in both parties. The president yesterday gave as his main event, which happened after we were up there, this speech in Saudi Arabia. Here's what our friend Batya said, 105, what she said about the speech. Okay. Anyone hoping to understand President Trump's foreign policy should watch his whole speech, probably the most momentous foreign policy address of my lifetime. Trump is building a new world order. I would encourage our allies to watch it closely so as not to miss out on what could turn out to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I agree with Batya. It was a historic speech. It is barely covered in the American media today. Barely covered. What is covered is the plane. That's getting a lot of coverage. Now, I've said before, the only thing harder than running against Donald Trump is covering him. There's lots of tough choices to make. Usually, when Trump doesn't get coverage for something, I understand why, because I'm pretty sophisticated about these things. I'm baffled by this. This was an important, interesting, newsy speech. And I mean, open up the major newspapers, go on television. People are talking about the plane, but they're not talking about Sean. Why is this speech not being covered?
Because honestly, because of their disdain for Trump. I mean, Batya is absolutely right. That what he talked about in terms of Syria, Iran, the country specific stuff in itself was huge. The
Correct.
approach to foreign policy and understanding his way of thinking and his overall like America first way forward in it. Like, again, there were so many pieces of that speech that laid out how Trump views foreign policy, how he views specific countries, and the idea that, I mean, I can see not covering an aspect of the speech, right? So it's, hey, he talked about this and then neglecting to talk about how he addressed Iran or Syria. I still have issues with that, but to not talk about it writ large, to not have it lead headlines, to not talk about, lead morning programs or lead Washington, is just to me proof positive again of the disdain and bias, because it's not just bias, it's hatred.
I agree they have disdain and there's bias, but they cover plenty of things Trump does that despite that, it can't just be the normal explanation.
But okay, then what? I mean, I'm open to.
I don't know. Dan, do you have any idea why did that speech get no coverage?
No, in fact, I will say I was unaware of it until I saw Botja's tweet, and like I knew he spoke, but then I went back and watched it on YouTube, and I was actually taken aback because I think you're both right. He did lay out in probably the best terms I've ever heard his theory of the case that basically, to build your economy, to create wealth, that like we will partner with you on that front. I think there's holes in it. There's problems with it, but that is Trump's theory of the case.
Right, and that's the point, though, Dan. You could exactly. You should have covered it, and
even if you disagree.
Yeah, absolutely.
To me, it was the Middle East version of what the vice president did in Europe. It was talking about fundamental change, and again, you could say Trump's totally wrong, but he's the president of the United States speaking at an important conference. And again, I don't have it quantitatively. Like, I didn't watch every minute of the Today Show or every minute of World News Tonight, but I did a lot of flipping around, and it was nothing. And again, New York Times, the lead of the New York Times should have been, here's what Trump's foreign policy vision is.
And even frankly, if you wanted to criticize it, which I think like the New York Times and others would, like the fact that he basically said, like, hey, we're not going to turn our back on you. These partnerships matter, when like he just went to Europe and gave them the middle finger. Like, it was the complete opposite. But nevertheless, it is his view.
By the way, to answer your question, as someone who does read the chat like obsessively, there was a good one of the I'm now going back to find it, but remember when we talked about the pool yesterday, the White House Correspondents Association put out a statement bemoaning the fact that the wire services weren't included in the pool yesterday. Maybe this is part of their little payback is, all right, fine, then we won't do anything on it. But again, I have no, like, to Dan's critique, if you wanted to go after Trump on his approach to foreign policy, fair, right? That's but to just ignore it. And oh, by the way, it to me that with everything that's going on, and if you can want to bemoan his approach to Europe or NATO or understand his thinking about the Middle East, then to ignore it to me was just an abdication. So for again, this goes back to, for all of the sanctimonious elite whining about the First Amendment and everything that that they say that they support, to ignore a monumental speech of this level when it comes to redefining our role in the world, and at least the approach for the next 3 years, to me was an abdication of basic journalistic principles.
Couldn't agree more.
I'll just add one thing that struck me, and I wrote a little short thing on Substack about this. I actually thought it was like a return to the old realpolitik of the George H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, which is, we're going to do business with people who you may not love, right? Yeah. And we've got both, military interest, economic interest, foreign policy interest, China, everything.
But also some George W. But also some George W. Bush, like, we want to lift you up. We want to be We want to be your partners to lift up the people in your countries. It's just crazy to me. All right.
I will say this, just as a side note, if you're interested, it's called Response 47. It's the White House Twitter feed. They did a fantastic job of putting out clips that were, digestible, a minute or so of key aspects of the speech. If you didn't see it and you just kind of want the Cliff Note version, check out that Twitter account. I think they did a really good job of making sure that people got that.
I agree, and you should do that if you don't have time for the whole thing. But the whole thing's obviously on YouTube, and I strongly recommend you watch the whole thing if you haven't. All right, I want to do the next 3 topics pretty quick because I want to get to the Tapper-Thompson book and Pete Buttigieg and talk about those at some length. So let's try to do the next 3 quick. I will say, for the person who put in the chat, everybody, including Halperin, reads the chat. I do not read the chat. I glance at it, but I do not read it. Okay, real quick, the plane. John Thune basically yesterday tried to mild-manner. John Thune basically said, no, you're not getting the plane. I'm paraphrasing. Dan, is the plane even deader than it was yesterday?
Yes.
Sean?
I will say it's less likely than it was yesterday, but I also think that he digs in more when he is told that he's
I agree with both those things. He'll never step foot on that plane. Okay, Russia, Ukraine. Just one question because we don't know what's happening because nobody knows right now. At least nobody I know knows. Sean, will Putin be in Turkey tomorrow? Yes or no?
I think I've said this all along. I do think he's there.
Okay.
I think he might even agree to a 30-day ceasefire.
Okay.
I don't think it ends. No. It ends well though.
Sean puts a big stake in the ground. Dan, Putin in Turkey?
No.
The correct answer is no. Okay.
I'm telling you, if he doesn't show up,
yeah,
and because obviously you saw the president sending Rubio there, that Putin has. I have a feeling that Putin is going to things are going to change real quick when it comes to how Trump approaches.
And then someone will rush into Putin's office in the Kremlin or one of his dashes and say, Mr. President, I have some very unfortunate news to tell you. Donald Trump has put something mean about you on Truth Social. And Putin will cower.
Yes. And the middle finger gets a little taller from Putin.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Reconciliation. Again, we're not going to solve it here. Lots going on.
What?
The speaker just said, according to Twitter, that now SALT may not be solved till the weekend. And they will still want to vote next week. So, Sean, if the speaker asked you for advice about what the biggest worry he should have about getting this passed is, what's the one thing you would tell him to focus on?
Medicaid.
Dan.
Yeah, I agree. SALT, because you got to have those moderates.
But
Stefanik, that is who you have to focus on. Get her, and she'll bring them along.
Well, see, here's what I'll say on SALT. This is my view. I believe it's at 30,000 now. It gets to 50. You peel off 2 of them. They're not. They might not get Lawler or Stefanik. But I'll tell you this: they don't need them all. They need 2 of the 5 or 6 or 3 of them.
And I agree. To me, the answer is the Freedom Caucus because the moderates will always cave in the end.
I think the Freedom Caucus
no.
They got to get them. They will. The Freedom Caucus will, but they have to get them as a group. They have to get. Right. They have to go to Mr. Roy of Texas and say, look, we got to get this passed. You've done all your complaining. We understand this is the best we're going to do. Let's get the thing to the Senate and figure it out. They've got to get those guys to calm down and gals because there's just too many of them.
What I would comment that is Trump calms them down because he says, fine, I'll take you out in a primary. If he says to the moderates, I'll take you out over SALT, they'll say, no, you won't. So
but they're gonna give them what they need on SALT.
Exactly. That's my point. They've got to
just remember
the Freedom Caucus.
The SALT thing is as I said, I believe that you don't buy you're not going to buy them all off. You'll buy 2 or 3 of them. You know.
I agree.
But right, so you buy enough off. But they've also got a bigger problem. Like SALT is a House specific parochial geographical problem. It is not a Senate problem. Yep. So when this goes over to the Senate, they don't care. There is not a SALT problem.
But the thing to remember, which people forget, is the SALT cap expires. So they've got leverage because if they bring down the bill, the taxes go up on everybody. But
they'll get 80% of the vote, so they win.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the new book. Not out yet. It's not out till next Tuesday by journalist Jake Tapper.
I think this is like one of those deals where just before you say, like when someone does something and on the news they say we're not going to say his name because they don't want to create. I think we can refer to it as a book without talking about the authors.
Okay. All right, it's a book.
They don't deserve to profit off this.
It's a book by 2 people. It's doing very well on Amazon, but I still question it's. All right, It's commercial prospects. So there's a number of levels we could talk about this book on. We talk about what's in the book. We can talk about the media coverage of the book. We can talk about the media's and the author's failure to be honest about their role in the cover-up. And we can talk about politicians. So we're going to try to do them all. First, the New York Times has the book. I have the book. A bunch of people have the book, even though it's an embargoed book that's not out till next week. The New York Times read the book, and they did one of those. Here are the 6 pieces of news in the book, okay? But here's what they said after reading the book and combing it for news, okay? Here are the 6 takeaways. Put up the pull quote, okay? The book does not contain any astonishing revelation that changes the broad perceptions of Mr. Biden was fit to serve. Instead, it is a collection of smaller occurrences and observations reflecting his decline. The authors write about a cover-up, though their book shows a Biden inner circle that spends more time sticking its collective head in the sand, blah, blah, blah. Again, this is exactly right from my knowledge of the book. I haven't finished it, but I've read a lot of it. They talk about a cover-up, but there's no reporting in this book, if there were, you'd know about it, that says, oh, here's the people who engaged in the cover-up and here's how they do it. It's all anonymous quotes making anonymous allegations about unnamed people. Now, despite the fact that there's no book and no news in this book, here's how the New York Post covered it this morning. This is number, where is that? Number 109, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stories, okay? I read all 6 stories. There's no news in any of them. All of them end, or say in the body of the story, the book goes on sale next week. It's as if Risa Heller, the publicist, who's very skillful, hired by the authors, somehow got the New York Post to write 6 stories, even though there's no news in the book. So my first question, Dan, as a student of news, Joe Biden and the New York Post, how does a book with the New York Times correctly says has no news in it get 6 New York Post stories?
Well, I think you have to separate. There's no news to people who consume this and follow this kind of for a living.
There's no news of interest to someone in Queens. There's none. Read all 6 stories. Name the thing in those 6 stories that people in Queens would find interesting?
That the president could not recognize George Clooney at an event. Mark, it's celebrity.
If you're a viewer of Fox News or Newsmax or a reader of Twitter, it comes as no surprise to you that he couldn't recognize George Clooney.
That is so they average 3.5 million a night out of a population of 350 million. So it's
if you're interested in Joe Biden's failure to recognize George Clooney, you're one of those 3 million people.
But I think to the average person on the street. Okay. When I walk down,
let me ask you a different way. Let me ask you a different way. Do you think the New York Post wrote 6 stories organically? They read the book and they said, "Oh my God, this deserves 6 stories." No way. There's no way. There's no way the New York Post read the book and said, "This is so explosively filled with news. We can't just write 1 story about it or 2. We must write 6 separate stories." Find the last book they wrote 6 stories about. Probably had some news in it. By the New York Times account, the book has no news in it. And the New York Post wrote 6 stories. And I can tell you, I don't know why, but it did not happen organically. Sean.
Oh, sure, of course.
I'm just trying to figure out, I will give credit to Risa Heller. I mean,
yeah, totally.
She's very good at what she does.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually, normally she is someone that you call when you're in trouble. So this just proves her prowess on the other end, which is how do you promote as well. So congratulations to Risa and her team. But I mean, to me, that speaks to her relationships with the New York Post. And I will say that I agree with Dan to some extent. The Clooney anecdote, to me, was more revealing, though, that if it was this pervasive, right? The idea that like the way that they describe his interaction with Clooney says to me that this actually is a greater indictment on the media and everybody else. That like the idea that if it's that bad that you literally don't know who George Clooney is and he's hosting the fundraiser for you, i.e. in your briefing, and supposedly according to Clooney, you've known the guy for 20 years, regardless of your personal relationship, he's just that famous, that you don't recognize him. That says to me that's a greater indictment on how pervasive this decline was and how the folks that are especially writing this book and their colleagues were part of that. Because if he doesn't recognize George Clooney, who's hosting a fundraiser at the fundraiser he's being hosted at, that you've read a briefing card about, then you can't then say that, well, gosh, we didn't know this, because that's what they're trying to make the argument of.
But you're wrong about this example, Sean. I say respectfully, because they didn't know about the Clooney story till after the election. right? But they did know this.
They might not have. No. Okay, fair enough.
But that's an indictment of Clooney, who now is being cast as a hero for speaking out. But it's an indictment of everyone.
My time, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Here's my point, though. If it's that, what I'm saying to you about the Clooney story is that if it is that blatant, that Clooney had that experience, then the idea that there weren't more signs around.
Correct. So let me get to that.
But by the way, and then I will say this on the New York Times, part of why they're saying there's no news is because they didn't cover it, and they have to therefore admit their complicity in this.
There's no news in the book, so that's not the reason, even though they should admit their complicity. I agree the Clooney story is the sexiest, and I could see one New York Post story about Clooney, not 6 stories about all different things in the book. Now, the book has no news in it. They don't expose the cover-up. They don't name names. They also don't acknowledge the press's failure to press the administration in real time about this, not just as a candidate. He was commander-in-chief and president of the United States. You say the Clooney example, not exposed until after. Here's an example that I cite all the time that you didn't need secret sources to expose. This is Joe Biden. This is 112. This is Joe Biden at an event honoring a congresswoman from Indiana, Jackie Walorski, who had passed away. The event was in honor of her death. He was meeting with her family after the event, and here's how President Biden talked during the event.
Where's Jackie?
Because I believe we can use these advances to do even more to make America stronger and a healthier nation. And so many of you know so much about this as well, and you're committed. And I want to thank all of you here for including bipartisan elected officials like Representative Governor, Senator Braun, Senator Booker, Representative Jackie. Are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here to help make this a reality.
Okay, so people say to me, "Oh, that's just a brain freeze." It's like mixing up Mitterrand and Macron. No, it's a dead person. No one talks to a dead person unless they've got some serious mental decline. And I will say again, I did a word search. How many paragraphs do you think these authors who write a book about Biden's mental decline and the cover-up, how many paragraphs do you think they devote to Jackie Walorski and Joe Biden talking to her? 0. It's not mentioned in the book. Okay, you're writing what purports to be a serious book. That clip was played on Newsmax and Fox 100 times. Kudos to them for actually covering a story of national and international importance. That clip, you think that clip's been played much on dominant media? No, it's not in the book. So I say again, if these guys think that they can get away with not holding the media accountable for failing to cover this, and they don't say this thing happened and it got no coverage, it's nuts. It's nuts. And it's the biggest media scandal in American history. And this book, which purports to uncover the cover-up, they don't uncover the cover-up. They barely get into it. They just throw the word around. And then they do nothing to hold our industry accountable, which I'll say in conclusion is helping Donald Trump to this day. It helped him get elected, and it's helping him to this day. They have a guy at CNN, their media reporter, who went on talking about deep fakes and how it was all deep fakes and cheap fakes. They can't be silent and expect to have credibility. Sean.
Point of personal privilege here.
Yes, sir.
As a guy who was skewered endlessly for comments, some personally inflicted, which I'll admit, to sit back and have clips equally out there of Jen Psaki and Karine Jean-Pierre talking about the prowess of that individual, saying that they never witnessed any examples of decline. To me, if you're going to come after me,
Sean, more than that, not just when it's
hold on, I need to make a clippable.
He ran circles around them.
Right.
They couldn't keep up with him.
I need to make this a clippable moment.
Go ahead. Apologies.
If you're going to come after me,
2,
Dan,
1.
If you want to critique the way I did my job and some of the statements that I made, that's fine. It's a free country. But to give Jen Psaki and Karine Jean-Pierre a pass for blatantly lying about the president's fitness for office, then you've got your priorities mixed up.
And
room tone.
Yeah, room tone.
Thank you.
Okay, Dan. Do you believe that this book is a credit to journalism?
Look, I think it is bringing up, how do I say this? This conversation needs to happen, right? All of this stuff needs to come out. All the dirty laundry needs to come out. there needs to be accountability of the journalism industry, which is not in this book. There needs to be more accountability of the role that Congress played, because the number of members of Congress who had examples of their own interactions, telephone calls, meetings canceled at the last minute, him freezing up, forgetting stuff in meetings. Like, lobbyists heard this. Like, you go to fundraisers.
There's a member from New Jersey, right, that was at that Clooney event that says, I can't go speak anymore about this, right?
Right. So here's Matthew. Here's Matthew Bartlett. So Matthew, friend of Two-Way, and a student of politics, not a journalist, student of politics, went on Twitter and tweeted something. There's a few Democrats quoted on the record, although it's kind of like psych background, like most of them are not in an interview with, but it's like scenic. And there's a few quoted in there who are now trying to be heroes. They're now trying to say, I saw it and I was very troubled by it. Matthew, we'll put up the graphics as you talk. Tell us the story of one particular member.
Yeah, New Hampshire Representative Annie Kuster. She was the chair of the New Democrats. Kind of jumped off the page when I read it, how she is at this star-studded fundraiser with Biden. And I believe Obama is there too. Yeah. And she says, he doesn't look like he knows where he's supposed to go. She had been with him in the photo line. It was a struggle for the president to engage. It reminded her of being with an aging grandparent, worrying.
Wait, hold on. Go back to the previous one. Okay, so one more down, the middle one. Here's her quote in the book. She'd already reached the conclusion that there was no scenario in which Biden would be reelected. She turned to Brownlee, her colleague. We can't go out there and campaign for 4 more years, she said. That's just not tenable. So that's what she says to the authors about how she was feeling about Joe Biden in real time while he was still a candidate before the debate. And now what happens next, Matthew? Or what happens? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, obviously we have the disastrous debate between Trump and Biden, and she immediately puts out a tweet. Tonight was clear. Tonight's debate between President Biden and former President Trump presented 2 starkly different visions for our country. President Biden laid out his vision, publicly affirming.
Right. So the preamble. Just as we're not holding Jake Tapper or whatever his name is singularly responsible for the media's hypocrisy and failure, he's one of many. Here's a member of Congress who wants to be a hero in the book for saying, I knew well before the debate that this was a disaster. And then after the debate, she's there saying what a great job Biden did.
So compounded by the fact that, again, Annie Kuster led the write-in Biden efforts during the New Hampshire primary, affirming his support, fending off a challenge. I don't believe it's ever been reported. A prominent U.S. senator outside of New Hampshire deliberately tried to interfere with Dean Phillips' campaign during that primary. So she led the Biden write-in campaign. She then chose not to run for re-election. And who took her seat? Maggie Goodlander, someone who had access with her husband to the president, access to President Biden. Not once during that campaign was Maggie Goodlander asked about the competency of Joe Biden, even while this was going on. People in New Hampshire were asking the press to do something, crickets. So, all of this was on the background, of a party that then changed their mantra that was country over party, just compounding the hypocrisy. You quote the Doobie Brothers, right? I ain't blind. This don't look right to me.
Yeah. Matthew's not a journalist. All Matthew did was look at the book and find what this congresswoman told the authors she thought before the debate. And then he found her statement on Twitter. Like, again, is it the most important story in the world? And they say, for those who think we shouldn't be talking about this, we should be talking about Donald Trump and the plane or Don Jr.'s business. The reason why the media does not have the credibility we need on those issues to hold Trump accountable is because of this. Not only this.
It's why Democrats have a credibility problem.
Correct.
I mean, what is not, and the reason I said that members of Congress need to be held accountable, the party, if you looked at polls in 2022 and early 2023, Democratic primary polls, 75% on average, sometimes upper 60s, sometimes low 80s, of Democrats thought Biden was too old to run. The people were saying what their eyes saw, this isn't right. Who protected Joe Biden to kind of ramp up a primary and be the nominee? It was the elite. It was the members of Congress and the kind of infrastructure in Washington, D.C. that said, he's the only one who can beat him. Harris is a disaster. No one else has the gravitas. We have to just put our heads down and grind this out. They thought that the mechanics of the party would lift him literally kind of off the ground over the finish line, and then we'll worry about it the day after. And so they all need to be held accountable. They all knew, which is why in interviews, they're all like, we need to look forward. It was such an openly discussed conversation in Washington, D.C. Everybody had examples in their own interactions. Everybody knew it. And they just said, we can't talk about, like, we can't go public with this. So you have to be held accountable. The media has to be held accountable. We should pay a price for it. It was terrible.
All right.
But you know what? I'll put a pin in this by just saying this. There's a through line from what we've been discussing today. It's what they won't. I mean, think about this: the laptop being suppressed, the not covering of his speech yesterday, the cover up of this. It is a continued. It's not just one example, right? We've got to remember that this is a continued pattern from these folks. What they will cover and what they won't, and that's why I go back to everything that the White House is doing to bring new voices in, because this attempt by the left-wing legacy media to manipulate what we see, read, and hear cannot be overstated. This is not a singular event. It is a continued through line in what they cover and what they don't, and how they feed us our news.
Well, and how they then tried to destroy people, because there is a Democrat, and I won't say his name, I don't know if I should, who has been on this program before, who they tried to destroy his life for speaking out the truth. And by the way, he was 100% correct. 100%.
I mean,
but think about this. I mean, the idea that one of the authors was one of the biggest offenders at this cover up and is now seeking to profit from it is mind blowing. The idea that his own colleagues are complicit in this and allowing it. No one's calling it out. It's right there and saying you were one of the people that chastised people for calling it out, and now you are profiting from this. Give me a break.
So Matthew, thank you. Very grateful to you. It's awesome work. Okay, so the publisher is teaming up with Brian Stelter, the CNN media writer. Here's what Brian Stelter writes in his newsletter that was just published. There are worthwhile discussions to have about Biden's condition while in office, the cover-up, and the media's coverage then and now. But predictable partisan gripes makes those conversations harder to have. So I appreciate how Tapper and Thompson are addressing the critics head on. They've got a Twitter feed, the book does, and the Twitter feed is saying, don't listen to the partisan haters, read the book. It's like, no, I'm not a partisan hater. I care about the media, and I care about accountability, and I care about the ability to hold all powerful interests accountable. They are pretending that criticism of their rank hypocrisy that many Democrats can see, and pretty much every Republican can see, they're pretending that that's partisan or biased or some motivation besides fidelity to the truth. And the book's currently, according to Brian Stelter, #1 on Amazon. So I will tell you, good luck to them selling books, whatever. Their failure to be part of holding their own profession accountable is outrageous. It's outrageous.
I think, and by the way, the idea that their teammates are getting involved, like that Brian's here cheerleading it, again, exposes how he covers this as well. I mean, for him to be part of the cover up now, I hope at least he's getting some kind of royalty off sales, because it's amazing.
He's doing what he does.
No, I know that, but I'm joking. I mean,
yeah, I hear you.
The idea that he is getting in on the act and helping this be perpetrated on us is amazing. It's not surprising. Yeah. It's not amazing.
Surprising. And I tweeted this morning because he went on after the videos showing Biden's obvious mental decline, and he said these are cheap fakes, and he explained what cheap fakes were. Well, they weren't. They weren't. They were legitimate.
By the way, it's
again,
I would just say this: thinking about the amount of criticism that Trump had got just even recently about the physical, like what he put out, which, by the way, we talked about here on this program. He put out more medical data than ever before, right? Than I've seen, 3 pages of every random test. And yet in a book that they're going to profit off of, they talk about how Dr. O'Connor, President Biden's personal physician, a former military officer himself,
had issues,
was literally recommending that he be potentially put in a wheelchair. And yet we want to go critique how much information Trump puts out. Way to go, guys.
Yeah. All right. We're going to talk briefly about Pete Buttigieg and then bring in your questions. He was in Iowa yesterday. Technical proficiency. If you're someone who wants Pete Buttigieg to run and do well, this trip was very well done. Big turnout, collection of names, smaller meetings around the big event. Just like not everyone who thinks they can be a presidential candidate in 2028 has the knowledge and the candidate chops to pull off what he did yesterday. So just technical proficiency, whatever else you think about Pete Buttigieg in 2028, very strong. In Iowa, a state that probably doesn't matter, but he went there for a reason. Here's two clips. First, here's Pete Buttigieg talking about Joe Biden, and then here's Pete Buttigieg talking about 2028.
Would the party have been better off if he had just not run for re-election?
Maybe, and right now, with the benefit of hindsight, I think most people would agree that that's the case. We're also not in a position to wallow in hindsight. We've got to get ready for some fundamental tests of the future of this country and this party, some of which are going on this very year, many of which will come next year.
And said, hey, we voted for him in 2020, and yeah, if he runs again, we would vote for him again. Was tonight's town hall the beginning of an assessment period?
Right now, I'm not running for anything, and part of what's exciting and compelling about an opportunity like this is to be campaigning for values and for ideas rather than a specific electoral campaign. So that's what I'm about. But of course, it means a lot to hear that people who supported me then continue to believe in what I have to say.
Because I am a believer in if you build it, they will come, and a sucker for all things Iowa, and because of the performance yesterday, I have gone from bearish to bullish on P28. I'm not saying he'll be the nominee, but just based on how well they did and he did yesterday, I'm now bearish. I'm now bullish. Dan.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's a serious candidate. I mean, he did well in 20, right? I mean, he ran. He was as a small time mayor to kind of get to where he got. He was young. He's got the benefit of experience. We talked yesterday about, and you just mentioned the kind of technical proficiency. He's doing all the things you want to do. He's going on podcasts. He's making visits, not just kind of, big splashy events in front of the cameras, but off the record, meeting with local activists, meeting with local officials, meeting with donors around the country. Like, I think he wakes up every day and says, what are we doing to try to, put ourselves in a position? I think the thing that he's going to ultimately have to figure out is what lane is he going to try to run in? Is he going to try to bridge the J.B. Pritzker kind of progressive wing with the Whitmer Shapiro moderate wing and try to find some sort of middle ground? And what is he going to run on? And then lastly, that question about Biden is going to dog him, at least for the first 6 months to a year. Every town hall he's going to get asked, what did you know? What was your experience? What do you mean hindsight? You mean you didn't have any, what was the cabinet discussing? So I think it's going to be a little bit of an anchor around his, and I think just like Harris would. But yeah, he gets this. He gets how to do it. He's telegenic. He speaks well. He's a serious candidate.
Yeah, we forgot to mention he grew a beard, so he's looking like a big boy now.
He and JD Vance.
Well, JD already looked like a big boy. I will say, I find, and I know that we've just played some clips, but again, if you think about his background, his 4 years, there wasn't an area within the transportation realm, airways, seaways, roadways, where there wasn't a massive abject failure on his watch. And the idea that we are giving him a pass after 4 years as the Secretary of Transportation on disaster after disaster and failure to address systemic problems in each of those areas is unbelievable. I will give you, I think that as a candidate, he projects well. He clearly has the logistics piece down, as Mark noted earlier. But substantively, it is the idea that he's continued to get a pass on doing such a poor job as Secretary of Transportation is amazing. I like I said, I will give him credit as a political athlete, as you like to say, Dan. But when it comes to substance, it is amazing the lack of interest there is in his actual record.
All right, 3 quick things for me. Then we're going to go to your questions. And again, please raise your hand if you're in the two-way platform. We have lots of new people today already, which is great. We'll get to you in just a moment. 3 quick things. First, if you want to hear my full monologue on that book about Joe Biden and the media, go listen or watch Next Up. 2, if you like what I'm wearing here, and you're interested in the merch, our merch is coming soon. This is from our friends at Fairway and Green. Please put in the chat how much you would pay for this item. If this item were available for sale, how much would you pay? We're just curious. We're doing a little market research to put it in the chat. And then lastly, Very grateful to you all for being part of this community. We're going to get to as many of you as we can here. Please try to today keep your questions or comments on the shorter side so we can cycle through, because we went longer than we usually do. So thank you all again. And here we go. Timothy, welcome in. Thank you for joining. As you unmute, tell folks where you are, what's on your mind.
Hello, I'm in Michigan, Detroit area.
Nice.
Yes, sir.
Boy, Pete Buttigieg, I wish he had run for Senate here in Michigan, but he took himself out of that. But boy, I'm mostly interested in the whole Tapper thing. I've kind of had a special dislike of Jake Tapper, going back years. And I'd just like to say, I'd love to hear Alex Thompson on Moynihan's show, just talking about how this book came into being and how he ended up partnering with Tapper, how Tapper get involved into his, great work, going back 2 years.
Yeah, we should be clear. Alex Thompson was one of the few journalists brave enough to stand up to the White House, spoke about these issues somewhat elliptically at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and deserves tons of credit for being ahead of most everybody else and pressing them publicly. Interesting question and comment. Thank you, Timothy. Sean.
I agree. I feel like, Alex was at least one of the few, and that might even be generous, people in the media who did this. I don't know if Alex just didn't think he could sell it on his own. I think Jake brought some cachet to it, and connections to the publisher. But I feel like Jake is riding off of Alex's actual reporting as an attempt to redeem himself, which is unfortunate. But I agree with you. I think I don't know that, to be honest with you, the other thing, Timothy, is I don't think that Alex will give you, and this is not a slam against Alex, don't get me wrong. I'm not, when you're in this kind of business, he's not going to go out there and give you the real truth, because he can't. So I agree with you. I'd love to have some kind of sodium pentothal where you got to actually hear what really happened, but I don't think you're ever going to hear that.
Dan.
No, I don't. I think you guys both said it pretty well. I don't know, but there's incentive to start trying to spill the beans. You're going to make money. People want to know.
Yeah, well, but the thing is, they didn't deliver. That's the crazy part. All right. Well, they didn't. I mean, if you read the book, who did they say in the book was part of the cover-up? The whole book's about, we exposed the cover-up. Who did they say in the book was in the cover-up? Because if they name names in the book, there would be a New York Post story that would be worthy. There's not a single name in any story I read today of people who've read the whole book saying who did the cover-up.
By the way, I will say,
but it's like a train wreck. You can't look away. People want to hear these details. I know you and I say there's not much new. I think the average person, it's like a divorce.
Maybe, but that's a different question. If you're purporting to write a book about the cover-up, shouldn't you have you finished the book? Shouldn't you know who did the cover-up?
Yes.
By the way, you do find it funny that they use the word cover up, to your point, Mark, and then never expose it. And yet these are the same people in their own, when they put their regular media hat on, will talk about disinformation and spreading lies. And yet they're calling something a cover up to sell a book and then not coming through. So it's just, again, then they'll go back on their other reporting beat today and call out people for misinformation and lying. And yet here they are perpetrating it. I will say the other point that I want to make is just on book sales. Remember, and you've published many of your own, that there's a difference between, at the end of the day, you're in a business of selling. People write books for various different reasons in terms of, people are academics and they want their work published or whatever. But in this case, this is the hype is about selling books. And so remember what their motive is here. And by the way, when I actually read, we talked about this before, the book Fight by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnas, they actually have some interesting reporting on the campaign itself and decisions. And I found that much more interesting. This to me is just a rehash of, hey, I'm going to go to people and get them to say, it's more of a gossip thing than anything else.
Yeah. So this is their pinned tweet currently, the book's Twitter account. We won't spend the next month fact-checking partisan liars on the left or right. But here's a simple demonstration of how false this viral video is from Tom Elliott. Listen to the real quotes, not the deceptive clips. Ignore the haters. Read the book.
Bye.
My goodness.
We're going to.
All right. Sorry about that. All right. One thing, Mr. Shaw, I want to ask you, Sean and Dan, the same question. Just yes or no, please. Have you ever met George Clooney in person?
I have not. No.
Okay, Dan, have you ever met George Clooney?
No, I was in the same room with him once, but I never met him.
Sean.
I don't discuss my relationship with George.
Or Amal. He's a good-looking guy. I will say that.
No. So here's a point of
I have not.
Here's a point of personal privilege. I've spent a little time with him, including one sitting next to him at a lunch. Okay, and I was just reminded from someone I know who's also spent time with George Clooney in person. I'm not saying he's an ugly guy, but he's relatively short. He doesn't have makeup on. His hair is a little different. I'm not saying he's ugly. What I'm saying is he does not look like George Clooney in person. So, and I'm not saying that's why Biden didn't recognize him, but it's not the best example in the world.
Well, but hold on a second.
It was a Clooney event. Yeah,
when you do an event like that, and I had someone text me the same thing here, you get a briefing book. All right. The candidates don't read the whole thing, every guest, who's there, what they did. So if you had two hosts, it was Julia Roberts, George Clooney, and I forget who the third person was. It would be like the cover of the book, their photo, how much they raised, like
100%.
There is not a chance in hell that he would not know who he is. And he was introduced. Sir, don't you remember George? And he still didn't remember.
I agree. All I'm saying is if you were in a room with Bill Clinton or Donald Trump, you know you are. It's just not the case with Clooney. He's an unassuming guy and he looks different and he's short-ish. He's not towering. How's that? All right, Mr. Shaw.
Yeah, but I will say this to Dan's point. It's not even he could have been George Smith.
No,
like,
I understand.
When you're getting briefed, and like to Dan's point, they were like, George, he's the host.
I understand. I understand.
Basically, Uncle Bob used to say no joke.
I just want to make sure the whole Tulane community knows I once sat next to George Clooney at a lunch.
There you go.
That's her point. Mr. Shaw, is your first name Author or are you an author?
Well, I am an author, but it's somewhat of a joke that my bandmate dubbed me Author TM Shaw, so I've used it as a.
Okay. What kind of band are you in?
It's a band called Beyond the Stars. It's a singer-songwriter band.
Cool. Where can we see your work?
Well, you can go to beyondthestars.band.
.band is a thing?
I never heard that.
It's a thing.
How long's that been a thing? That's a good one.
Geez, I don't know, probably 5 years.
Let's get the morning meeting .band.
You could form a band. Actually, it'd be an interesting trio.
It would be.
If you saw me dance, then you definitely don't want to hear me sing.
No.
Yeah. Mr. Shaw, welcome in. Tell us where you are and what's on your mind.
So I'm in Ottawa, Illinois, which is the site of the first Lincoln-Douglas debate. And it's funny that you're talking about this Biden thing because it's been the question that I've had since last June when I first started watching this. And I thought it would be like a time travel episode. I would have to bring up the distant past, but it keeps coming back. And but the question I have, I have a joke first. I wanted to say that I felt like I had embodied the morning meeting because, like Mark, I shared a birthday with Alexander Hamilton, and like Sean, I grew up Roman Catholic in Rhode Island, and like Dan, I used to be a Democrat. So,
where did you grow up in Rhode Island? That tiny little state.
I was born in Providence, but I grew up in Scituate.
Okay.
I had this idea that I played Sean in soccer, but that's that might not be.
Or is there? It's possible.
It is possible. Yeah, it's just. But
who knew this would end up being the reunion show?
Yeah.
Right.
Reunion episode. I mean, sorry. All right, Mr. Shaw, what's on your mind?
Okay, this is actually the sort of the angle of this that I haven't heard anyone ask, and that is. So if we talk about the press. How didn't they know? Of course, I knew. I predicted that Biden was going to be replaced 7 months before it happened. I thought it was obvious that he was in cognitive decline in 2019. And
is that because you had big secret sources inside the Biden White House,
or just
exactly,
or just a C-SPAN subscription?
Yeah, no, I just had a functioning brain.
Yeah,
and
well, that's a lot more than most of the folks in the White House press office. I mean, press corps. So,
right. So that was obvious. There was a cover up, and it was obvious. But the question that I have is why did they let Joe Biden debate in June?
I'll answer that one. Because there's this conspiracy theory that they did it because they wanted him to do badly and then they could replace him. The reason he debated was because they were very far behind, and the trajectory was he was going to lose. They had to have a game-changing dynamic, and they were confident that he would not only do well in the debate in the abstract, but that he would dispel doubts about his ability to do the job by standing up to Trump in the debate.
But why did they think that? I that's the thing. There's a story
because he was not always bad. Look at the State of the Union. His State of the Union that year was fantastic. He had the capacity to have good days and bad days, as many people with acuity decline do. And so they thought, and again, to be honest, he had more good days than bad days. He truly did. So they thought odds are it's going to be a good day, and we'll get him rest, and we'll prepare him, and he'll do, and the expectations will be so low that he'll do well enough. And he might have. It wasn't a foregone conclusion.
Okay, I find that implausible, but that's the difficulty with this is I find it implausible. And as a former Democrat, and the reason I became a former Democrat is because it became clear through 2016 and 2020 that the Democrats weren't interested in democracy. And that as a party that was trying to kill its own primary, that it was working so hard to make sure that there wasn't an open primary.
Yeah, they only did that 3 cycles in a row. Mr. Shaw, thank you for joining.
Okay,
we got to go. Ms. Boylan, welcome in. Please tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind.
Hi there. My name's Lita. I'm in Wisconsin. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, ma'am. Welcome in. Where are you in Wisconsin?
I'm right in the middle. If you've used Wisconsin like a map on a dartboard and you hit a bullseye, I'm right about there. So
you're like due west of Milwaukee.
No, I'm a lot further north than that. I'm like west of Green Bay. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm in the middle. There's not a whole lot around me.
Okay. Welcome in.
So thank you for having me. With regard to Biden's decline, I'm an experienced dementia nurse, and my qualifications don't permit me to diagnose, and he's not my patient. That having been said, I'm pretty comfortable in my professional assessment skills, and the man has Parkinson's. He's had Parkinson's for some time, and the idea, the hubris involved in believing that he was just going to have a good day, and that tens of millions of Americans have not watched their parents and grandparents decline like this. They lost me. I've been a registered independent since 1996. I've voted Democrat in every single presidential election up until last year. And this is why. Because I was like, who's in charge?
Lita, is there anything that you want to see the Democrats do to move past this, or to kind of welcome you back? Like seriously, or are you lost for a few election cycles now because you're just, you felt like you were betrayed?
So I'm originally from Michigan, and the Democrats have had like all the branches of government in Michigan for a hot minute now. And I think it's because it's a reaction to the Flint water crisis, right? Like people in Michigan, and nobody seems to discuss this in the mainstream media or a whole lot of places, period. People are still really angry about the lack of accountability there. There are a lot of communities that have extremely high and extremely difficult water systems because of the history of industry there. And what started off as a cost-cutting solution and ended up as a profiteering solution to poison a bunch of children, and that was under Republican leadership. So the voters are really angry, so they voted in all of these branches of Democrats. And that we're probably toward the tail end of that. That's a guess. I kind of feel like that. Like the trust, and this is also one of those things, again, as a medical professional, that hinges on people's health. That hits people really viscerally. I think everything's going to take at least a few election cycles. Like, I don't know how much coming back there is. And I think it's a lot of, like, you're going to have to prove yourself to me, basically.
Really interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. How'd you start watching Two Way?
A friend recommended it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good friend.
Come back regularly. All right, Sean, what do you have on tonight?
Steve Moore.
Love Steve Moore. I was on a panel with him recently. Very smart man.
Very smart man. We're going to talk tariffs, big financial deals, inflation. We'll talk all that stuff. Plus, I think maybe a little immigration. But then it's the week of the Steve Bannon on Friday. So it's Steve Moore today, Steve Bannon on Friday.
A lot of Steves. A lot of
Steves. Yeah.
Dan, where are you watching the game tonight?
I will watch it from home after I believe I will be on Laura Ingraham tonight talking about Joe Biden.
All right. I will be on Michael Smerconish in just a moment. And then let me tell you about 3 two-ways that are coming up later today that you can enjoy. First, recorded. So if you want to be part of the two-way interactive experience at 10 a.m., Michael Moynihan with Joshua Citarella, the artist, international culture writer, and of course, the host of Doom Scroll. That's at 10 a.m., so just in a couple minutes. And then you can see it tonight at the regular time at 7 p.m. Eastern time on YouTube, where it will debut. Megan, our friend Megan McCain, at noon today. Again, remember her new time for Citizen McCain is at noon Eastern time. Michael Knowles, host of the Michael Knowles Show, will be Megan's guest. And believe me, they'll be talking about Joe Biden too, because I know Megan's intrigued by that story. And then I'll be back at 6 p.m. tonight for Two-Way Tonight. Amongst our guests, one of my favorite guests that we have on is, now I'm going to blank on his name. Lori will remind me. Ambassador Rufus Gifford.
Nice.
Rufus Gifford, who was ambassador to Greenland, but also was Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's top fundraiser, along with Jeff Katzenberg. And so we'll talk all about foreign policy, but we'll also talk about
Was it Rufus political director in under Obama?
He was the deputy campaign manager, and he was the deputy finance director in 2008, and then he went to the DNC. He was in Hollywood.
He's a smart and charming guy, and he'll have plenty to talk about. So we'll talk about foreign policy, and we'll talk about the Democratic Party, and really looking forward to having him back on Two-Way. Grateful to you all. Grateful to our New Hampshire correspondent, Matthew, and to everybody who asked questions. And again, I know we didn't get to as many hands that were up, so please, if you had your hand up today, please come back tomorrow. We'll see you in 23 hours. Have a great day.